So far in this course, we've talked primarily about Mesopotamia and Egypt. Of course, we did talk a little bit about the kingdom of Hatti up in Anatolia, or the Hittite Empire. But in this lecture, we're going to talk about the importance of the Levant, that area of the eastern Mediterranean coast. You might remember that it was fairly important in the late Bronze Age. It was a hotly contested area between Egypt and Hatti. But the people in the Levant during the Iron Age will establish religions, writing systems, and ways of living, which will affect the world all the way up until the modern day. Beginning around the Middle Bronze Age, so around the year 2000 BCE, we see the emergence of a Semitic culture in the Levant, one which we call the Canaanite culture. The Canaanites were Western Semitic speakers. If you think about the old empire of Akkad or Hammurabi's Babylon, those were Eastern Semitic empires. The Canaanites were their Western Semitic cousins. The Canaanites worshipped versions of the same gods as their Eastern Semitic cousins. Baal-zephon was the god of storms. In fact, for the Amu, who ended up settling within avarice within the Middle Kingdom, the same ones who adopted Set as their patron god, they saw Baal-zephon and Set, both being the gods of storms, as being two versions of the same god. Within their pantheon, they had a supreme god, a god called El, and it should be noted that within the Canaanite language, El was just a generic word for God. So in other words, their supreme god was just called God. Elohim was plural. So if we were speaking about Baal-zephon, Asherah, and El, we'd be speaking of Elohim. Asherah was the wife of El and the goddess of fertility. Sometimes she's referred to as Astari. That'll be the term that Mark van de Meerup uses within your readings. In addition to their gods, the Canaanites also brought the Mesopotamian practice of country altars set up on tops of hills or mountains. They called these high places. Essentially, if you weren't close to a city, if you weren't directly attached to a temple, you could see a country priest. Remember these high places. They'll be important in the narrative as we move forward, particularly when we start talking about the history of Judea. Throughout the late Bronze Age, the local kings of Canaan were always vassals of greater kings. They themselves were never members of the Club of Great Powers. They were simply local rulers who owed their allegiance either to kings of Egypt or kings of Hatti. However, after the Bronze Age collapse, Canaanite kingdoms gained independence and flowered. Northern Canaan included what we call the Phoenician city-states. These city-states were primarily coastal, and they were the sea traders of the Iron Age. As you'll be reading about, they invented the writing system that we use in the West to this day, the phonetic writing system. Throughout the Iron Age, they colonized the southern Mediterranean, or North Africa. The most successful of their colonies was Carthage, which created actually the very first Mediterranean empire. We'll be talking a little bit more about that next week. We'll also be talking about the Greek city-states more next week and their colonization of the northern Mediterranean. Those Greek city-states not only got their alphabet from the Phoenicians, but they copied many of their own forms of government and their patterns of colonization after the Phoenicians. Your next reading is going to be on the Phoenician city-states. South of them, in the hill country of southern Canaan, so more inland, we have the emergence of a group of people we call the Israelites during the Iron Age, sometimes also referred to as Hebrews and later on referred to as Judeans. Your next video is going to be on those folks.